I never thought women could lie so boldly to your face, even after you find something interesting in her purse. My name is Daniel Mercer. I used to think you could read a relationship like a wine label, look at the vintage, trace the origin, and know what you're getting into. But no label could have prepared me for that night. We were at Maison Revel, her favorite. Candlelight flickered off the glassware, casting little fireflies across the white linen tablecloth. The air smelled of rosemary lamb, truffle oil, and that expensive perfume she wore only on special occasions. Rebecca looked breathtaking. Hair pinned up just enough to look effortless, that dress I gave her last Christmas hugging her in all the right ways. But the sparkle in her eyes. It wasn't for me. She laughed, this high, breathy laugh I hadn't heard in months, and she gave it freely to a waiter who looked barely old enough to shave. He was charming, I'll give him that. Confident. Too confident for someone making minimum wage and reciting specials. Merci, Jean, she said, dragging out that merci like she was on a Paris runway instead of sitting across from her husband of 7 years. I watched the way she looked at him, tilted head, soft smile, that slow blink she used to reserve just for me. You know that moment when the room's full of music and noise, but your ears go completely silent. That's what it felt like. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth, untouched lamb cooling on the plate. I should have said something. Should have made a joke. I even opened my mouth at one point, but nothing came out. Not a damn word. Instead, I just studied her. The way she sat straighter in her chair whenever he approached. The way her hand lingered too long around the stem of her glass. And the way she didn't seem to notice I hadn't touched my wine. Are you okay? She asked, flashing me a quick smile. Yeah, I said. Just soaking it all in. She reached across the table and touched my wrist lightly. You went all out. It's beautiful. It was supposed to be. I made the reservation a month ago, requested this exact table by the window. Even had her favorite macarons delivered to the restaurant earlier in the day, so they could serve them after dessert. But right then, all I could feel was a growing tightness in my chest, like the walls were moving in. And still, I smiled. That polite, practiced kind that says everything's fine even when it's absolutely not. You ever been in a moment that looks perfect on the outside, but inside, you know something's wrong? Like your gut knows what your heart refuses to admit. That's where I was. Sitting across from the woman I loved, and feeling like I didn't even know who she was anymore. At one point, the waiter leaned in to refill her glass. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and whispered something to him. He laughed. She laughed. And I looked away. Not because I was angry. Not even jealous. I looked away because I didn't want her to see the question forming behind my eyes. When did I stop being enough for you? I picked up my wine glass, swirled the contents like it might reveal some truth at the bottom. But all it gave me was my reflection, just a man sitting in front of his wife on her birthday, trying not to unravel. Let's make a toast, I finally said, raising my glass. To what? She asked. I paused, then gave the safest answer I could find. To us. She smiled again, raised hers, and clinked gently against mine. To us. But her eyes were already somewhere else. Can you imagine that? Celebrating someone's birthday, raising a glass to your marriage, and feeling like you're the only one who showed up. And that was just the beginning. We got home just after 10. The city was already winding down, but inside our apartment, everything still smelled faintly of her perfume and the takeout bag the sitter left on the counter. I watched as she kicked off her heels near the door and padded across the wood floor barefoot, like nothing was out of place. Like we hadn't just come back from a dinner that left my insides twisted like a soaked rag. She hummed a little tune under her breath, something I didn't recognize, and picked up the small stack of wrapped boxes I'd left out on the coffee table earlier that morning. One for each year we'd been married. It was tradition. Which one should I open first? She asked, I skimming the labels like they were distant relatives at a party she didn't want to attend. Start with the smallest, I said, forcing a smile. Always save the best for last. She peeled back the ribbon delicately, like she was handling something fragile. I'd spent a week finding these things, pieces of her, scattered across boutiques and bookstore shelves. A silver bookmark shaped like a hummingbird. That out-of-print poetry collection she always quoted from. A pair of jade earrings from that little antique place she used to love, back when we had time to browse on Sundays. She unwrapped each one with a soft thank you, followed by a kiss on the cheek. Never the lips. Always the cheek. Daniel, she said, you didn't have to go so overboard. It's your birthday, I replied, trying to keep the mood light. I wanted you to feel spoiled. She nodded, but her eyes stayed locked on a tiny tear in the wrapping paper. You okay? I asked, keeping my tone soft. She blinked like I'd pulled her from somewhere else. Yeah. Just tired. Long day. I almost believed her. We sat in silence for a moment, the TV humming low in the background, some nature documentary neither of us had the energy to follow. The room felt dim, like the walls were leaning in a little more than usual. Same lamp. Same couch. But none of it felt familiar. And then, I did what I always do when something feels off, I tried to fix it. What if we took a weekend trip? I said, suddenly. Just the two of us. Somewhere quiet. Mendocino, maybe. We could rent that little cottage by the bluffs again. She didn't even hesitate. I don't think I can get away right now. Work's piling up. I nodded slowly. Right. Of course. But something about the way she said it, flat, rehearsed, already decided, it told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just declining a trip. She was declining us. She leaned back on the couch and pulled the throw blanket over her legs. Her smile was still there, but it wasn't reaching her eyes. It hadn't for a while. I watched the light from the TV flicker across her face, soft blue and white strobes dancing across her skin, and for a moment I wondered what she was thinking about. Who she was thinking about. There was a time when I could have guessed. But not anymore. I turned away, pretending to check my phone, pretending not to feel the distance between us stretching wider by the second. We weren't arguing. We weren't fighting. But we weren't here either. And I think that's what scared me most. Silence filled the room. Not the kind you fall asleep to. The kind that keeps you wide awake, wondering when everything got so still. I cleared my throat. Well, happy birthday, Beck. She smiled again. Thanks, babe. And that was it. Just two people sitting in the same room, surrounded by wrapping paper and quiet. But we both knew something was missing. We just hadn't said it out loud yet. The thing about suspicion is, it doesn't need proof to grow. Just a feeling. A twitch behind the ribs. A question you can't quite put away. For the next few days, I tried to shake it off. I really did. But every time Rebecca laughed at her phone or hesitated before answering a call, I felt it rising again. It started small. Innocent, even. I glanced at her phone when it buzzed on the counter. Just a name. Just a time. A notification from some team calendar or work thread. No red flags. Nothing concrete. So why did I feel like I was slowly drowning? One afternoon, while she was showering, I caught myself standing by the door, just listening. Not moving. Just waiting. I hated that version of me. The one who was timing her shampoo routine like it was surveillance. It made me feel pathetic. That night, I checked our shared calendar. Scrolled through her events. Nothing stood out. Meetings. A lunch with her manager. One note about a charity auction. All things I knew about. No hidden entries. No strange gaps. I even pulled up the Find My iPhone app one night, just to see. She was exactly where she said she'd be. A wave of guilt rolled in so fast I actually winced. Shut the app like it burned my hands. Who was I becoming? This wasn't me. I'd never been the paranoid husband, never the guy who needed to track his wife's whereabouts to feel sane. But lately, I wasn't sure what sane even felt like. The next morning, I watched her getting ready, putting on that soft pink lipstick, the one she wore to our first anniversary dinner. She hummed under her breath, completely at ease. And for a moment, I felt like the crazy one. Like I was inventing shadows where there was only light. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe she was just pulling away because work was hard or life was loud or we were drifting in the usual way couples do after a while. Maybe the dinner with the waiter meant nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into her silence. Her tiredness. Her distance. I remember one evening, she came in, dropped her keys on the counter, and leaned into me for a hug. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want it, but because I was still trying to read it. Was it genuine? Was it guilt? Was it routine? She kissed my cheek, her lips soft and warm. Thanks again for last week, she said. Dinner was perfect. And just like that, my suspicion melted a little. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just scared. Because if it turned out I wasn't wrong, if she really was pulling away from me, then what did that say about everything we'd built? So I told myself to stop. To trust her. To breathe. The next day, I even left my phone out on the table. Unlocked. Just to prove to myself that transparency still had a place in our home. That night, we watched a movie together. Her feet curled under her, her head on my shoulder. And for the first time in days, I felt close to her again. Still, somewhere deep down, a whisper remained. You're not imagining it. Something's off. But I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. I wasn't looking for anything. That's the part that still sticks with me. I wasn't snooping. Wasn't digging through her things like some jealous cliché. I just needed a pen. Simple as that. We were both working from home that day. I had a client call in 5 minutes, and the drawer in the kitchen, the one that usually held all our pens, was somehow full of batteries, twist ties, and everything but writing utensils. So I walked into the bedroom, half distracted, already thinking through what I needed to say on the call. Her handbag was sitting open on the bench at the foot of the bed. She'd left it there like she always did after getting home. I reached in quickly. Didn't think twice. I saw a receipt first. A chapstick. Her work ID. Then, at the very bottom, buried beneath some crumpled tissue and a travel-sized hand lotion. A small silver box. For a second, my brain didn't register what I was holding. It wasn't until I turned it over and saw the brand name, clean and unmistakable, that the room shifted. Something intimate. 3 of them. Unused. Still sealed. Not dusty or old like something forgotten in the back of a drawer. Fresh. What the hell? I just stood there, hand frozen mid-reach, that little box burning in my palm. Rebecca and I hadn't used anything like that in years. Not since the first year of our marriage. We'd been on the same birth control routine for ages. Regular checkups, same pharmacist. Nothing had changed. Or so I thought. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the box still in my hand, like if I stared at it long enough it might explain itself. My client called. The phone buzzed right beside me. I let it ring out. The pen I'd originally gone searching for rolled off the bed and hit the floor without a sound. I didn't even notice. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. You ever have one of those moments where reality doesn't just crack, it splinters? Because it wasn't just about the something intimate. It was what they meant. They weren't a mistake. They weren't mine. And they sure as hell weren't there by accident. I ran through every possible explanation. Maybe they were old. Maybe they got stuck in a handbag she hadn't used in years. Maybe, God, I don't know, maybe she picked them up thinking they were something else. But none of it held water. I looked down at the sleek packaging, the thin layer of dustless shine, and I knew, deep in my bones, I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the way her eyes wandered lately. The distant smile. The way she pulled away before bed, saying she was tired, night after night after night. This was confirmation. I didn't even hear her come in. Hey, she said, her voice casual. Have you seen my... Her sentence stopped cold. I didn't have to look up to know she saw it. The box was still in my hand. Still right there, like an accusation. I looked up slowly, met her eyes. And she went pale. She stood there frozen for a second, like her brain hadn't caught up with her eyes. Then, slowly, Rebecca walked over and sat down across from me on the edge of the bed, smoothing her skirt like she needed something to do with her hands. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. We both just stared at the space between us like it held some kind of bomb neither of us wanted to touch. Finally, she let out a soft breath. Not a gasp. Not guilt. Just controlled release. Oh, she said, her voice light, almost casual. I forgot those were in there. I raised my eyebrows but didn't speak. I wanted to hear it, really hear it. She reached out, took the box gently from my hand, and turned it over once. Her fingers were steady until they weren't. I saw it, the tremble. Small. Barely there. But it was enough. I meant to throw them away, she said, placing the box carefully on the nightstand like she was done with it. They've been in there forever. Forever? I finally spoke. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Rebecca, why would you have something intimate in your bag at all? She shrugged, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, eyes fixed on some invisible thread in the carpet. I honestly don't remember when I got them. They've just been there. One of those things you mean to clean out and never do. I nodded slowly, like I was hearing her. But I wasn't accepting it. Not really. She didn't look at me. Not once. That told me more than anything. I stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the street below. Kids on scooters zipped past. A couple pushed a stroller. The world went on like everything was fine. Behind me, the silence settled like dust. Thick. Inescapable. Okay, I said finally, still facing the glass. If you say so. She stood too, arms crossed now, defensive without trying to be. You don't believe me. I turned halfway, just enough to meet her eyes. Do you? Her jaw tightened. Daniel, I told you what happened. No, I said, calm as I could manage. You told me a version. Another silence. Longer this time. She picked up the box again and dropped it into the trash can beside her dresser. The sound it made, just a soft plastic thud, still echoed. There, she said, a little too bright. Gone. But it wasn't. Not really. That box might have been in the garbage now, but the question it asked. It lingered. And it followed us everywhere. That evening, we barely spoke. She cooked pasta. I opened a bottle of wine. We talked about emails, whether or not the upstairs neighbors were fighting again. But underneath every word was the echo of that silence. The kind that grows between two people when the truth walks out the front door, and neither one is brave enough to chase it. It was 2 days later, at the kind of cafe where everyone orders drinks they can't pronounce and pretends not to notice one another. I wasn't planning on seeing anyone. Just needed a break from the apartment. A break from watching Rebecca act like we were fine when every inch of me screamed we weren't. I just grabbed my coffee when I heard her voice. Daniel. I turned, and there she was, Marissa. A mutual friend. Not close, but close enough to get invited to birthdays and exchange holiday cards. The kind of friend who remembered what kind of wine you liked and who always had one eyebrow slightly raised, like she knew something she wasn't saying. We hugged lightly, just the polite kind. She asked how I was doing. I lied and said, great. She smiled and said she'd seen Rebecca recently. Really? I asked, too casually. When was that? Oh, last Thursday, I think, she said, stirring something bright green in her cup. At Bar Sutter. I was meeting a client. Saw her in the corner booth. She paused then, just a beat too long. She was with a guy from her office, I think. Name escapes me. Probably work-related. You know how those things go. Probably work-related. That phrase landed in my chest like a nail. I smiled. Nodded. Gave her a vague, polite, yeah, and let the conversation drift somewhere else. Small talk. Weather. Something about her niece applying to colleges. But I wasn't listening anymore. Because my mind was already there. Thursday night. Rebecca had come home late, said her meeting ran over. Kissed me on the cheek. Said she was exhausted and slipped straight into bed. I remember her clothes from that night, elegant but casual. Lipstick a little brighter than usual. I hadn't thought twice about it then. Now it felt like all the missing pieces were laughing at me. I told Marissa it was great seeing her and walked back to my car with coffee I didn't want anymore. The moment I sat behind the wheel, it hit me. Bar Sutter. Rebecca and I had been there once before. Cozy, candlelit, tucked behind an alley in the historic district. It was the kind of place that whispered, not shouted. The kind of place you didn't go for business. I sat there, engine off, keys in my lap. Just breathing. The inside of the car felt too tight. Like the air had thickened, pushing in on my chest from all sides. I rolled down the window halfway, but it didn't help. I looked down at the steering wheel. My knuckles were white from gripping it. Probably work-related. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to. I even said it out loud, it was work. Just work. But my voice cracked. Because deep down, I didn't believe it. Not anymore. This wasn't about one night at a restaurant or a box of something intimate that supposedly didn't mean anything. This was about a pattern. A series of subtle misalignments. Missed glances. Deflections. And now, a quiet confirmation from someone who didn't even realize she'd delivered it. I started the engine and drove home slowly, not in a rush to arrive. When I pulled into the driveway, Rebecca's car was already there. Inside, the living room lights were on. Soft. Familiar. I sat there for a long time with my hands resting on my thighs, engine idling, the dashboard humming. Everything around me looked the same. The neighborhood. The trees. The sky turning its usual pale orange. But inside me, something had shifted. I stepped out of the car and walked up the path like a man returning to a house he no longer recognized. When I walked through the door, I could already smell it. Rosemary. The same scent from her birthday dinner. The same one that clung to her when she leaned in for the too-light kiss outside the restaurant. It curled through the house now, cozy, familiar, intoxicating in a way that made my stomach turn. Rebecca was in the kitchen, back to me, humming softly as she stirred something in the pan. She turned when she heard the door click shut. Hey, you, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Perfect timing. Dinner's almost ready. Her voice was light. Cheerful. She wore that same soft sweater I always liked, sleeves pushed to the elbow, hair tied back loosely. She looked like home. But she didn't feel like home. I set my keys down and hesitated by the counter. Do you have a minute? She glanced at me, still smiling, but her hands didn't stop moving. Sure. Just let me finish this part, it's time sensitive. I nodded, though I had no idea what this part was. She poured a sauce over roasted chicken thighs with a practiced grace, sprinkled a little parsley, and turned the heat to low. Then she faced me, wiping her hands on a dish towel like she was bracing for something but still trying to stay ahead of it. "What's up?" she asked. I studied her face, looked for signs of guilt, avoidance, anything, but all I saw was a woman playing a role so well she might have forgotten it was a role. "I think we should talk," I said quietly. She tilted her head, the smile faltering just a little. "About what?" I drew in a breath. "About us." That was enough to bring the stillness. For just a second, the only sound was the soft bubble of sauce on the stove. She crossed her arms but tried to keep her posture casual. "Is something wrong?" I gave a small shrug, careful not to let frustration show. "I don't know. That's what I want to figure out." She looked away, toward the stove. "Daniel, we've both been tired lately. You've been working late. I've had deadlines. It's just life." "I know," I said. "But it feels like more than that, doesn't it?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the cabinet and started setting the table, plates, silverware, folded napkins. Like she hadn't heard me. Like dinner was more pressing than the chasm opening between us. I followed her movements with my eyes, my hands tightening around the back of a chair. "I'm not trying to fight," I said. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want to understand. I'm open to working through this. If something's broken, I'd rather try to fix it than ignore it." She paused at the edge of the table, one hand resting on the wood. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "That's kind of a heavy conversation to drop right before dinner." I smiled faintly. "Yeah. I guess I've been carrying it all day." She gave a quiet laugh, one that didn't belong in this moment. "Can we just eat first, please?" I looked at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Sure." We sat down at the table. She served the chicken, passed the potatoes, made a joke about the wine label looking like a horror movie poster. I nodded, smiled, pretended I could taste anything. And all the while, that scent, rosemary, filled the room. Same as that night. Same as the smile she gave the waiter. I wanted to reach her, to break through whatever wall she'd built between us. But that night, she chose the recipe over the reckoning. And I let her. She waited until after the dishes were done. I dried the last plate and was hanging the towel back on its hook when I felt her presence behind me, closer than usual. Still. Intentional. When I turned around, she was staring at the floor. "Can we talk now?" she asked, almost in a whisper. I nodded, and we moved to the couch. She didn't sit next to me, she curled into the far end like a child trying to disappear into the cushions. The silence stretched. I didn't fill it. She took a breath, then another, and then finally, "There's something I need to tell you," she said, barely louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. My heart thudded once, hard. I didn't speak. Just looked at her. Let her say it. "I met someone." Just 3 words, but they shattered something I hadn't realized was still whole. She kept her eyes on the coffee table. Couldn't look at me. "It was never physical," she rushed to add. "Not really. Just 2 dinners. And a kiss." A kiss. She said it like it was the smallest thing in the world. Like she was offering a paper cut in place of a bullet wound. But it stung all the same. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling for a second. 2 dinners. A kiss. That's what she'd chosen to share. And if that's what she was admitting, I couldn't help but wonder what she wasn't. "How long ago?" I asked, my voice lower than I expected. 3 weeks, she said. "It ended before your birthday. Before the restaurant. Before the candles. Before the gifts and that smile I couldn't quite recognize anymore. I didn't mean for it to happen," she continued, finally looking at me. Her eyes were red around the edges, but she wasn't crying. "I was just lonely." And he listened. He noticed things. Small things. Things I didn't even realize I missed. She paused. "I never slept with him," she said, like that made it better. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. I sat there, breathing through it. Feeling something rise in me, not anger, but something quieter. Sadder. Like watching the tide pull away a sandcastle you'd worked years to build. I nodded once. Just to let her know I'd heard. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said finally. Her voice cracked then. "I didn't want to hurt you." She reached across the cushion. Not to grab me. Just to close the space a little. But I didn't meet her halfway. I didn't pull away, either. We just sat there, the room too quiet, the clock too loud. She waited for something, maybe a reaction, maybe forgiveness. Maybe even for me to explode, so she could feel absolved by my rage. But I didn't give her that. All I gave her was truth. "I think the part that hurts the most," I said slowly, "is how long it took you to say this." She blinked, eyes wet now. I wanted to protect what we had. I looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time in weeks, I saw the woman I married, the fear in her, the shame, the way she was trying to come back from something she never meant to fall into. Part of me softened. I won't lie. But not enough. Because some confessions don't bring clarity. They bring distance. And that night, even as she curled up beside me and rested her head on my shoulder, I felt farther from her than ever. We started counseling on a Tuesday morning. It was her idea. She called the place. Made the appointments. Sent me the address like it was a lunch meeting. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just showed up. The office was clean. Neutral. Like someone had gone out of their way to design a space that couldn't offend anyone. Beige walls, calming plants, a little white noise machine humming in the corner like it might drown out whatever we were afraid to say. Our therapist's name was Judith. Mid-50s, thoughtful eyes, voice like velvet and logic braided together. She greeted us like we were old friends trying to remember how to be kind again. Rebecca spoke first. Always. Every session. I just want us to get back to what we had, she said in that first meeting. I know I made a mistake. I was selfish. But I miss him. She didn't look at me when she said it. I sat there, hands in my lap, nodding occasionally. Not cold. Not angry. Just distant. Detached. Judith turned to me. Daniel, how do you feel hearing that? I looked at Rebecca for a long second, then back to the therapist. I hear her, I said quietly. That's all I've got right now. That became the pattern. Rebecca poured her heart out in careful, cracked sentences, confessions dressed in apology, promises stitched together with sincerity. She said she wanted to rebuild. Said she'd do whatever it took. Said she hated who she became in that moment, and she never wanted to be that woman again. I listened. Nodded. Spoke in measured, polite phrases. I'm still figuring out what I feel. I'm trying to be present. I don't want to fake forgiveness. Judith would sometimes offer small exercises. Writing down what we missed about each other. Saying one thing we were grateful for each week. Rebecca tried. She wrote pages. Read them aloud through tears. I miss the way he used to look at me when I was brushing my teeth. Like even that was sacred. I'm grateful he still comes home. I stayed quiet most of those sessions. When I spoke, it was calculated. Cautious. Words dipped in reason, never emotion. Because the truth was, I didn't know what to feel. Some days, I wanted to reach for her again. Others, I couldn't stand the way her voice trembled. There was a day, maybe our fourth session, when Judith paused after Rebecca finished speaking, and turned to me again. Daniel, healing is possible, she said gently. But only if both people are willing to be here. Not just physically. Emotionally. I nodded. I know. But inside, I didn't. Because being in that room didn't mean I was still in the marriage. It just meant I hadn't left yet. It started with a single night. I told her I had work to finish, and the guest room was closer to my desk. She nodded, didn't argue. I didn't go back to our bed after that. The guest room was small. Cold. The mattress was firm and unforgiving. But I slept there anyway. Not because I needed rest, because I needed space. Space from the smell of her shampoo on the pillows. Space from the way she reached for me in her sleep like muscle memory. Like habit. And I couldn't pretend anymore that habit meant love. At first, she didn't say anything. But I noticed the small things. The way her footsteps paused outside the door before turning back. The way she'd leave the hall light on a little longer. Just in case. One morning, I woke up to a note on the nightstand. I made coffee the way you like it, extra cinnamon. Thought you could use a good start. There was a flower beside it. One of those little wild ones she always picked from the backyard when we first moved in. I left it there all day. Didn't touch it. Couldn't. Another day, it was a framed photo, us on a beach trip 5 years ago, laughing so hard the camera caught both of our eyes squinting. It had been quietly placed on my desk. No note. Just memory, framed in guilt. She was trying. I saw that. But it was like watching someone decorate the ruins of a house that had already burned down. At dinner, we barely spoke. She'd ask how my day was, and I'd answer with words that could fit in a fortune cookie. Fine. Busy. Same as always. She stopped asking after a while. I came home once and found her sitting in the living room, an old playlist echoing low through the speakers. Our playlist. She looked up, hopeful, and patted the spot beside her. I walked past her and said, I need to shower. I caught the flicker of hurt in her eyes just before I turned the corner. Later that night, she knocked on the guest room door. Just once. I didn't answer. She waited. Then left. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway, slower than usual. Like she was dragging something invisible behind her. It wasn't anger keeping me from her. It was something colder. Indifference. Not the kind that comes from not caring, but the kind that comes from caring too long, until the well runs dry. We were still married. Still shared a mortgage. Still passed each other in the hallway, brushing shoulders like ghosts in a place we used to call home. But we weren't partners anymore. We were placeholders. And every time she left another note, or a smile, or a soft attempt at kindness, I felt that strange ache again. Because she was finally reaching for me. But I wasn't there anymore. It was raining that night. Not the dramatic, thunderclap kind, just a quiet, endless drizzle. The kind that soaks everything before you even realize it's falling. Rebecca got home around 7. The house was still. Lights off in the hallway. No music. No smell of dinner. Just silence that felt a little heavier than usual. She slipped off her shoes and called out, "Daniel." Nothing. She walked through the room slowly, like she was expecting to find me mid-task, halfway through folding laundry or finishing an email. But every room she entered was already complete. Tidy. Cold. When she opened the bedroom door, she froze. It was the note she saw first. Resting on my pillow, written in my hand. "You deserve someone you don't have to lie to." Beside it was a manila envelope. She reached for it with trembling fingers, already shaking her head before she even opened it. Divorce papers. Signed. Every page. Already notarized. And under the envelope, a key. Small. Silver. Tied with a ribbon she'd used once for a birthday card. There was a post-it stuck to the ribbon. "It's on 8th and Lark. 1 bedroom. Quiet. Lease is paid through 6 months. You'll like the light." Her hand flew to her mouth. The room swam around her, blurring and tilting like her body had suddenly lost its anchor. She dropped to the bed and stared at the papers again, willing them to change, to vanish, to be something else, anything else. But they weren't. They were real. This was real. She clutched the envelope to her chest, like holding it tighter might reverse what it meant. Her tears came slow at first. Then faster. Full-bodied sobs that echoed through the house we'd once filled with laughter and arguments and lazy Sunday mornings. She whispered my name. Once. Twice. Then louder. But I wasn't there. I'd left hours before. Not out of anger. Not as revenge. Just, done. Because some people don't break things. They just stop holding them. I'd waited. Waited for her to talk. To fight. To choose us with urgency instead of apology. But she never did. She loved me, I don't doubt that. But she loved me passively. Too softly. Too late. And I realized one morning, watching her slice strawberries in silence, humming the same old tune, we weren't going to make it. Because healing requires motion. And she stayed still. So I moved. Quietly. Kindly. Finally. And when she sat alone on the bed that night, holding the keys to a life she never wanted to live alone, she understood. Not the night of the confession. Not the weeks of silence. Only now. And by then, I was already gone. If you've ever stayed too long, or left too late, drop a comment below. And if this story hit you somewhere deep, hit that like button, and subscribe for more. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's clarity.